sort of secrets of the drug war that most people don't know is that the majority of drug arrests have always been for marijuana offenses. If you took marijuana out and you just focused on the other types of drugs that the police make arrests for, there aren't enough of them to justify the billions of dollars that we spend every year in fighting the war on drugs. So fighting the war on marijuana has always been an important part of the drug war. It's been even more so under this particular administration. The Bush administration has made fighting marijuana use one of their major drug war priorities. And in cities around the country, we've seen a spike in arrests for marijuana possession. And the sad part is, of course, is that most of these arrests are of young people, particularly youth of color. And so we're doing the very thing that many people say that we shouldn't, which is labeling children very early on with criminal records for offenses that aren't really that serious, and which the consequences of their having an arrest or a record will follow them for the rest of their lives. And what we found was that the increase in marijuana arrests in New York is related to a couple of things. One is the move towards quote-unquote community policing, or broken windows theories of policing.
Quality of life.
Yes, which has the police focus on minor offenses as a way of reducing crime. Now, I think that most people would think that it makes sense to go after things like panhandling and maybe squeegee people, or maybe people who are engaged in nuisance behavior. But the majority of the people who are being arrested for marijuana offenses are not people who are smoking in the street. They're not walking around making a nuisance. They're actually most of the time kids who are arrested because in the course of a stop and frisk, the police find a small amount of marijuana on their person, or they may be hanging out with a group of people in whom one of them might have a joint in their hand. When the police approach them and find that one, they arrest the whole group. And we really believe that this has become a principal way for the police to both target youth of color, since 87% of all of the arrests are of Black or Latino youth, but also to be able to acquire information about them, to get them into the city's database, which is quite big now, of people for whom they've gotten fingerprints and photo mugshots, etc. But the other thing that's driving this is the low amount of pay for the NYPD. You know, most people think that considering the number of police that we have in the city and the way that we talk about how important they are, that we would give them a decent salary. But in fact, the NYPD salary is at an all-time low. So a lot of police officers feel a pressure to make overtime, and doing marijuana arrests is a great way to acquire overtime hours and overtime dollars. And in fact, among the police, making these types of misdemeanor arrests for marijuana and other offenses are known as collars for dollars.
Whites actually engage in illegal drug use at a much higher rate than people of color. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yes, it's true. And I think one of the reasons why we founded Break the Chains is because we think that a lot of people don't understand that the drug war to some degree is actually much more of a war on people of color than it is about actually dealing with drug use. And that contrary to the stereotypes in the media and what people believe and hear all the time, whites use drugs at the same rates that people of color do, but that they don't suffer the same law enforcement consequences, because the police are not in their communities searching out dealers, they're not raiding their houses, they're not raiding their schools, and it's borne out by the statistics here in New York. For many, many years, more than 90% of all of the people incarcerated for drug offenses in New York are African American and Latino. I have yet to have anyone who would ever argue to me that the majority of people who buy, use, and sell drugs in New York State are people of color. And yet that's where the law enforcement is targeted, which means that for most white folks who are using drugs, it's decriminalized for them because they don't have to worry about the police coming after them for their behavior.